A controversial decision by the Supreme Court today involving the Voting Rights Act. The highest court threw out a Louisiana congressional map that added a second majority black district in the state. The justices called the map unconstitutional racial gerrymandering. The map was drawn in early 2024 and added a second black and Democratic lawmaker to Louisiana's Republican majority delegation. The ruling comes amid an unusual mid-decade redistricting frenzy by both parties heading into the midterms. Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock says the ruling is silencing voices.
The same people who have robbed the people of their doctors with these draconian cuts to Medicaid, the same people who have robbed the people of their health care, the same people who are taking the people's money through these tariff taxes that have raised the price on virtually everything, are now trying to take their voice so that they cannot hold them accountable.
The Supreme Court says the case will now be sent back to the lower courts for further proceedings.